Gene Lebrun, lived in Rapid City. I was in the South Dakota Legislature from 1971 through 1974 as a Democrat. Last 2 years I was Speaker of the House. And we've lived in Rapid City now for about 56 years, something like that. I'm from North Dakota originally, political science major, undergraduate school, law school at University of North Dakota. Practiced law here with the same firm for about 55 years. So that's my background.
So take us through maybe a little bit, I thought, this first of, obviously people in South Dakota know that Democrats haven't had majorities very often in the legislature. So I just thought maybe we start with, how did that happen in the early 70s that the Democrats actually got a majority?
Well, we really didn't have a majority, Seth. They had a one person, in 73 and 74, we had a one person majority in the Senate and a tie in the House. And the way that came about is that when they did reapportionment in 1972, they reduced the size of the House from 75 down to 70. And at that time, both houses were controlled by the Republicans. The Democrats had less than a third in either house. But as the bill was going through, they realized they had to have one house that was one man, one vote. Before that was every county had the representatives. So when they reapportioned, they cut the size of the House from 75 down to 70. And as the bill was going through, somebody said, well, with 70, you could conceivably have a tie. And that's when, Dick Kneipp had been elected governor by then. But they provided that in the event of a tie in the House, whichever party had the governor's chair would get to organize the House. Well, lo and behold, in the 72 election, Dick Kneipp got elected governor again, and we ended up having a tie in the House. So because Kneipp was a Democrat, we had the election of having the speaker. So I ran for speaker and got it. So I was speaker for 2 years, the third one in the history of South Dakota, and there hasn't been one since.
Yeah. Would you like a glass of water or something?
Wouldn't hurt if I had one, that'd be handy. Yeah, I've got this catch in my throat, so it's sometimes a problem.
A little dry in here.
Yeah, it is a little dry. Well, I first got elected in the fall of 70, so I was there 71 and 72, when it was under Republican control. At that time, for example, the committee agendas were never posted in advance. When the committee met, if you had a bill before that committee, you got to go and make your presentation in that bill. But before they discussed it or voted on it, you got kicked out. Only committee members were permitted to stay in that, and there was no record kept of their vote. And they didn't have to take the bill up. The committee chairs had the power of what we call pocket vetoes. Sometimes you go present your bill, but never come up, never come out of a committee. We had the smoke out rule, but that didn't happen very rarely did that ever happen. But there was no agendas, no record kept of the vote, and even sometimes when you found out maybe an amendment was passed, if the chair didn't like the amendment, he wouldn't put it on. I remember one time the chair of the Judiciary Committee, I knew the amendment had passed in committee, and a friend of mine told me that. When the bill came out, the amendment wasn't there. So I talked to him, I said, Mr. Chairman, what happened to the amendment? He said, I didn't like it, so I didn't put it on. But that's kind of how it went.
And so what was the impetus to change that then? Because obviously it had probably been that way for a long time.
It had always been that way as far as I know.
So what was the motivation to change?
Well, my second year, I was chosen by, I think it was the AP or some organization, to go to what they call the Eagleton Institute of Politics, which is down in Florida. Tom Green, a Republican from Watertown, and myself were the ones chosen from South Dakota. And that was a program put on by Rutgers University. And they invited 2 legislators from half the states. And that year was the bottom half of the states in the alphabet. And that was wonderful. They just talked about a book that just came out called Sometimes Government. It was trying to reform state government. And so I learned a lot then. So when we had the tie, I decided to run for speaker. And I went to that caucus, the Democratic caucus, and I explained what I learned down at that program in Florida. And so I got elected speaker. Unfortunately, the Republican Party leader at that time was Joe Barnett. And Joe had been in line to be speaker. But Joe was a great friend of mine, so we talked about it. And Larry Pearsall was the Democratic leader as a result of that election. And so Joe and Larry and I became very close friends. And Larry and I talked to Joe about what we wanted to do with the House rules. And he said, we can never do that as Republicans. But if you guys do it, we'll support you. So we did it. So we rewrote the House rules, the joint rules completely. And as you probably know, Seth, after that, every bill had to have a hearing in a committee. The committees had to be open to the public. The votes had to be taken in public and be reported and kept track of. Every committee had to have an agenda in advance so people know when the bills are coming up. People from back home would come down and testify. It just worked real slick. We were very busy, obviously, because every bill had to have a hearing. And then the same on the floor. When I was speaker, the first year we had electronic voting, which was a whole change. So we had to implement the electronic voting system. But I think that helped because before that, if your name was Anderson, you had to vote first. People would say, well, how did that guy vote? How did that guy vote? Electronic voting, you didn't know until they put the vote up on the board. And I think that helped a lot, too.
Huh. So Republicans, some Republicans were sort of quietly in favor of the rule changes, or?
I think so. Like I say, I'm sure that if the leader, Joe Barnett, had resisted it, we wouldn't have a hard time getting it through.
Yeah.
We had some partisan votes, obviously we always did. I learned very quickly, if there were somebody called for challenge the ruling of the chair, if I asked all those in support of the ruling of the chair, I would lose because there'd be a tie. If I said all those that want to overrule the chair, I would win because they couldn't get more than 50, or 35 at that time. Yeah. So it worked pretty well.
So you mentioned the pace a little bit, like in the prior rules, not every bill got a hearing. I would imagine that the pace of lawmaking was a lot different. How did it change then? Did things move a lot? You've got hundreds of bills and everyone has to have a public hearing, and did that change how you did your jobs then?
I think so, but I think it caused the members of both parties to be more responsible because they knew their vote's going to be of record. People are always looking at how they voted in a committee meeting. And the meetings were open all the time, so there weren't any secret deals made in the committee meeting. It was always open to the public. And other legislators who were not on that committee, members of the administration could be in there, whether the governor or some of his people. So I think it made things much more open and transparent. And I think that helped.
What would have happened if Democrats hadn't had that situation where you were able to make the rules for that lifetime? I think what would have happened?
I don't know. I remember Joe Barnett saying we could never get that through the Republican legislature. But I think, it's 50 years later, it's changed. Although I must say, if you go look at the rules now, they've backtracked somewhat. They have these, you see bills introduced as just a title. We would never have permitted that. You have to have a body in the bill. But now you see bills that, bills dealing with education. That's all it says. So they wait till they get in committee, then they amend something into it. Well, you don't have notice of what the amendment's going to be in advance. I think that's a back step. I really think so.
Huh. Did legislators conduct themselves differently? I would imagine some of them, when you had a closed committee hearing, maybe conducted themselves a little differently than when it had to be open. Did it change the way people acted?
I'm sure it did. I know also, I think 72 and 73 and 74 was the first time they started having TV cameras in the House chambers. And I know that changed things. People would do a little more grandstanding in some things, but sometimes a little more reserved too. I think that changed the dynamics quite a bit also.
What was it, just to circle back on how Democrats were able to make gains in the 70s? Was it just kind of the mood in the country with Watergate, or what was it that propelled you guys to make some gains at that time?
Well, locally, I think Dick Knipe, having been elected in the fall of 70, he was a real breath of fresh air. And in 72, of course, that's when the Democrats are moving ahead nationwide, whether it's in Congress or in many states. There was a Democratic movement in the early 70s. We just happened to fall at the right time. And then during, I can't remember, 71 or 72, I think that 73 or 74 is when Knipe had us introduce an income tax bill. And we pushed that pretty hard. And the result of that, some Democrats got beat the next year. We never did get. We came close. We got it passed through the House, couldn't get it through the Senate.
Yeah. So now, as we've talked, every bill gets a hearing. Do you ever regret that Because some bills, maybe some bills should be.
Okay, that's
Is
loaded.
there any bad that comes with it?
Oh, I think there probably is, although, you know, we learn pretty quickly, you can dispose of bills pretty quickly, even with a hearing. You know, if they're really bad, they aren't gonna get through. And sometimes you get bills in there that the sponsor may come in and say a few words, nobody else is there to testify one way or the other. They just, you know, they put it in at the request of a friend or something. But I think, we look back in those 2 years, 73 and 74, we passed some major legislation. The Investment Council was passed back then. We passed the first EPA bill in South Dakota back then. We just passed a lot of great bills. We did the reorganization of the state government. Did the executive branch reorganization. We rewrote the judicial branch, a section of the Constitution. We put in the mandatory retirement for judges at certain ages. That's major back then. So we got a lot of good things done.
When you look back on all that, the rules to make the legislature more transparent, where does that rank in things that you're proud of from that time?
Probably one of the best things we did, I think. It really was. There was such a revolution in South Dakota to have that happen. It has never happened before. And it hung in there. It's still there, but they've modified it somewhat since then. I know Kay Jorgensen, she was kind of the moderator for the pages back then. And she was just so excited we did that. She still talks about it.
Yeah. Who are some of the other people that were instrumental in making this happen with you?
Oh, gosh. Well, Larry Pearsall from Sioux Falls, now Judge Pearsall. Joe Barnett, I mentioned, Jim Nelson from Rapid City. In fact, my second year as speaker, it would have been 74, Jim Nelson, Republican, nominated me to be speaker that year, a Republican, a good friend of mine. And Jim was very instrumental in it. And a lot of the more serious Republicans, they got on board. Jim Jobert had been a speaker before, sometime before I'd been, and he was still down there. And he was for it. He helped us get it through. There was I remember his name, there was a legislator from up at Mobridge. I'm blank right now on his name. When we did the EPA bill, they had a power plant up there of some type or other, which was spewing all kinds of pollution out. We had to carve out a little exception in the EPA bill for that power plant, otherwise he wouldn't support it. And he had some people that agreed with him, so we had to carve that little niche out of it, permit that power plant to stay on board.
Yeah. You mentioned to me on the phone, people are more willing to compromise.
Oh, man.
Was that a big factor in getting some of these rule changes through?
Yes, oh, absolutely. You know, every night after the session, we'd have the next day's calendar there. Well, usually Larry Pearsall, Joe Barnett, and I would sit down, either in our room and have a beer, take that with us. Okay, here's this bill, what are we going to do in that? We'd know the night before where the fights were going to be, what we can work out compromises on. And it's amazing how things worked. And we were all friends. We didn't fight among ourselves. Compromise was not a dirty word.
Yeah. So you're the last Democratic Speaker of the House in South Dakota. When do you think we'll have another?
Well, I remember the year after I was speaking, I went back down there for some Rapid City Chamber Day or something. And Joe Barnett was speaker then. So he invited me up to the speaker stand with him. Said, "No, here's the funny thing that happened to me in the way of the speaker's chair." He said, maybe we should let them have the speakership about every 20, 30 years. Well, we're way overdue now. It's been almost 50 years. We're way overdue.
Wow.
Well, what, you got 10 Democrats in the total legislature now, something like that? It's terrible.
11.
11.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
With these transparency things, it was all rules, right? None of that is in the law as far as the.
You know, I'm not sure about that. So there may have been some legislative changes as well. In the Constitution, of course, when we rewrote the judicial branch article of the Constitution, that's changed somewhat. And then since then, I was on a committee working on the legislative article. And our committee made some recommendations, but the legislature didn't approve any of them.
Yeah. So do you think people realize now, I mean, do we take it for granted now that we have all this transparency in the legislature? Every bill gets a hearing, we can listen to it online. Do you think people realize that it took people, some effort to actually create that?
Oh, I think a lot of it may have been forgotten, but to be honest with you, Seth, there isn't that much transparency in South Dakota yet. Look at the attempts to get Kristi Noem's travel expenses when she was campaigning for Trump. I mean, it's still pretty close when they want to close in with one party so strong. There's not much we can do. And if you notice, Republicans, they fall in line. They fight somewhat, but they fall in line pretty closely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you. Anything else you wanna?
No, but thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it was great to hear some of these.
And you're doing a heck of a good job, Seth. I know that.
Thank you.
I remember when you wrote for the Journal, your articles are always great to read.
Yeah, thanks.
Did a great
Thanks.
job.
Well, thanks for doing this.
You bet.
My father was in the legislature during the last Democratic majority in the Senate. I didn't know even.
Who's your-
Dale Howlett. And I grew up in that, in the legislature. I didn't know the transparency background that you guys did.
Oh, yeah. It was, of course, I was, 32, 33 years, something. I didn't know any better. I just thought it the way it should be. We never thought about we never really thought of it as much in partisan terms. We knew we had a tie. We knew we could get things done. I made sure I had a Democrat majority of at least one on every committee. So I worked the hell off the Democrats. But we cooperated. There were very few bills that were strictly partisan line bills. There were a few, obviously, but not that many. And you kind of knew going in, okay, we're going to fight on this one. It probably won't get through.
Was it very much aligned with the values of the people of South Dakota in regards to working well with them back then?
I think it was somewhat, yeah. I don't think, at that time, of course it was strongly Republican, but not this far right-wing or left-wing stuff it is now. Everybody was kind of in the middle, working back and forth. We had, actually, there was what they called the barnyard caucus. Legislators from both parties, they wouldn't caucus, either the Democrats or Republicans. They had their own little caucus, Democrats or Republicans. A bunch of farmers from East River and some of the ranchers out here. There was a guy named Bill Danicus, he was a Democrat, but he led the barnyard caucus. Good guy.
I think that's an interesting point that you make, especially now with what you said about Republicans more or less falling in line with the party rather than representing what the state's values are in regards to tribal leadership, state leadership, and working with each other to benefit the people of this state.
Well, look, even at the national level, I mean, it's just party line. Just because if the Democrats are for it, I'm a Republican, I'm going to be against it. That's kind of the way it goes.
When you think about if the leader doesn't want to bring it up, the leader doesn't bring it up nationally.
That's right. Well, look at, when Obama asked Biden, the guy who's now the Attorney General, he wouldn't even give me a hearing for the Supreme Court. The Judiciary Committee never had a hearing on it. Merrick Garland,
No. Yeah. Maybe you should run for the legislature again.
At 81 years old, no, my wife's the one that's more active, but she's
It's a tough race for a Democrat.
Pat was on the Board of Regents for 18 years, president of it. Now she's on that Science and Technology Authority up at Lake. She's been on that ever since it started. Yeah, she's been very active.
Yeah, they've been getting a lot done up there too.
Oh man, I don't think most people in South Dakota appreciate how much is being done up there, and what that means to the state. It's amazing.
Up there and saw the thing they built over the road up there.
Oh yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
You ever been down in it?
Yeah.
Oh good. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Just amazing down there.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll try to get some other stories to bring in and tell us some more stories of.
I was trying to think of anybody else from around here that was now. Like Homer Canderas is gone, Frank Roland's gone, Chuck Donnelly's gone. They were the three leaders in the Senate back then.
Okay.
I don't know who's left out here.
Harvey Wallman, was he in the legislature then?
Harvey, yeah.
Do you stay in touch with him at all, or is he?
I haven't seen or talked to Harvey in years, no. Actually, I see his brother more than I see Harvey, I think, lately. Although, when they had the dedication of the Dick and Ipes statue down in the pier, I went down for that, and I think Harvey was there for that, yeah. One year, they used to have what they call the Legislators Leaders Conference. It'd be the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, people like that. One year they met down in Florida, and Harvey and Ann, Harvey was Lieutenant Governor at the time, they were down there, and my wife Pat and I went down. So we spent the whole weekend with Harvey and Ann, great people. They don't have that conference anymore. That was a good group. Yeah, that was a fun group.